think that's the biggest thing with sustainability. It's like there's no real definition, there's no legal definition, especially in the fashion industry, so people can get away with saying a lot that doesn't have stuff backing it up. Hey everyone, welcome back to Inspiroue. Today I'm going to be sharing all the questions that I ask before I buy from a brand to make sure that they're not greenwashing and to make sure that they're not racist. So if you have watched my last video, I shared brands that I no longer support because there's been a lot of tea aired recently with brands like Reformation and Pangaia about discriminatory workplaces and racist sales floor tactics, and I've always wanted to share the questions that I asked to spot greenwashing because a lot of brands these days claim sustainability and ethical labor, but I also wanted to share the questions that I also ask now to make sure that brands aren't just posting a black square for Black Lives Matter and that they're actually committed to doing anti-racist work. So just gonna dive in. I also made all of this into a blog post and this checklist that I just posted on Instagram. I made it downloadable so you can save it as a PDF for the next time you go shopping, but I really think this is gonna be a great resource for people who are looking to buy from more sustainable brands, and I hope that this can just help us find and support brands that actually deserve the support versus all of the ones with all the drama recently. So I'm going to start off with the questions I asked to make sure brands are anti-racist and committed to change first, just because that's the most timely. I think it's the biggest priority and it should be like the first thing that brands should be doing right. It's crazy that they're not. I've already spoken so much to the intersectionality between sustainability and anti-racism. So many links on the blog talking about that, so I won't do that here. But here are some things that I look for when I'm choosing to support a brand these days. First, have they acknowledged the Black Lives Matter movement and have they donated to BLM organizations? And the second easiest way to spot diversity is in their Instagram feed and on their website. Does the brand show their products with diverse representation in their models, who they feature, the influencers they work with, their partners, a lot of that stuff. It's so easy to tell when you go to a feed and it's mostly white women that they don't really make diversity a priority. So yeah, like looking to see moving forward if brands have actual diverse representation on their feeds and in their stores and on their teams. It's great to see inclusion digitally on websites and Instagram, but it's also important to look out for that in stores. A lot of the drama airing is a lot of racist sales floor tactics or discrimination in store environments. So when you're going into a store, first off, like, do they greet everyone and treat everyone the same way? Do you see fair representation in both the shoppers and in the employees working there? Like, there should be a pretty diverse group of sales associates and store managers. And then the next two are more specific to right now in this time. So has the company acknowledged their diversity? Have they been transparent about it? One of the really great campaigns going around is Pull Up for Change on Instagram, which basically demands brands to pull up or shut up, which I love. When participating in this campaign, many brands have shared the percentage breakdown of their teams, both in stores, in like their offices, and at the executive level. And by being transparent, they are also able to specifically pledge what they're going to do, and we're able to hold them accountable. That's the biggest reason that I think it's important for brands to actually share those percentage breakdowns versus just saying that they're committed to making a change. And then the other thing there is there's some way we can actually hold them accountable, like a timeline or like in the next few months, like is there another checkpoint? Because a lot of the times things like this happen, people commit things and then they get lost because as consumers, there's more news every day and we get tired or bored or forget about some of the other ones. So I think that's something that I'm specifically looking for. And a lot of brands who participated in Pull Up for Change have also committed to hiring like a black C-level so that there's more voice there, or starting like a diversity and inclusion board and having diverse representation on that board. The other thing I want to call out here is you cannot just have the only diverse workers in your company be your diversity representatives or be on this inclusion board. You know what I mean? Like, that is so not the point, because you're not just here to hire these people to speak up about this, but in order to actually be inclusive of BIPOC people, they should be in the roles that everyone should naturally be in, not just like hold into this one diversity team. So I wanted to call that out too. And then the last one is specifically about founders. This came out of my last video as I was thinking through this. It's hard to not associate a founder from the company, which is the Pangaia case with Mira. And I think it's so important to be able to see that a founder of a company is actively vocal and passionate about supporting BLM too. So some examples are smaller brands, like New Classics is one that I love, where Alyssa has been very vocal. You can see on her Instagram, and that's proved to me that like I love their brand even more now to see that. The important thing to see there is like, I don't care what's happened in your past. I care about people apologizing, acknowledging their privilege, and also being productively engaged in feedback. This is just an example off the top of my head. Like Eileen Fisher in their comments, people tell them how they can be a part of this conversation and do better, and they actually listen to the feedback and they post like in a way that actually is better based on that feedback. So that's just a small example, but that was something that I saw that I was like, okay, great. Like I don't expect every team to know exactly what they're doing. That's not the point. I think the point is to be open and not to be defensive when people are telling you how you can do better to support Black Lives Matter. That's something that I look for from founders. Like you should not make your page private and not have any statements like Mira. Like I want to see apologies and I want to see like a real drive to make a difference. So that's basically what I look for right now when it comes to anti-racist companies. Those are just like the signs that I think are easiest to gauge off of, but of course I would love to hear what you guys think. And of course this is by no means an extensive list. I just wanted to share the ones that I mostly and mainly ask. My priority is still to support small BIPOC owned brands, because I think when the founder is a Black, Indigenous, or person of color, they're definitely like more anti-racist than a brand that isn't owned by BIPOC, just based on experience. The next question is, does this brand pay and treat their workers ethically? I cannot believe that ethical labor still isn't an industry standard. It's insane to me because this is a human right. You know what I mean? Like people who make our clothes should be able to work in safe working conditions and be paid fairly. So this is something I look out for. A really good way to spot this is if a brand is transparent about it and it's easy to find on their page. They have videos and they have like images of the factories that they've partnered with. I think transparency is one of the keys, but transparency itself doesn't mean ethical labor. Like it's just one of the things to check. Another thing that you can look out for is proof of living wages paid. And then lastly are specific voluntary certifications and programs that companies can partake in. A lot of the regulation that goes into factories is not like actually regulated because it spans so many countries, but a lot of brands can voluntarily apply for certifications like SA 8000. I'm just gonna have screenshots on the screen because there's so much to dive into there, and these are all also linked on my blog if you want to read more into them. There's also the Better Work program and something called like the Nest Artisan Guild, which empowers artisans around the world and makes sure that the artisans themselves are paid fairly, because when you're working with artisans, they're not usually part of like a big factory, right? It's usually like a woman, a mother in her home making something. So that was a really cool one that I learned about. And then there's also the WRAP certification. So these are just examples of some. Regulation in the fashion industry is something that I think we're continuing to push for, but from what I've learned over the past few years is that even like the auditing and like making sure that things are actually following regulations all the time, there's a lot of iffy stuff there, and no one takes the onus because brands usually don't have to. They're just like, I have this piece of paper, this person visited like 2 years ago, blah, blah, blah. So just something to look out for. Next 3 questions are to do with sustainability. So fabrics, production methods, and then sustainable scale, and I have examples and breakdowns of each of these. So the first one I'm going to start off with is, do they use sustainable fabrics and materials? I feel like this one's often so overlooked, but it's one of the easiest ways to spot greenwashing. For example, Reformation prided themselves in being a sustainable company, yet they used cheap fabrics like viscose and nylon in most of their $300 dresses. It makes no sense to me, even though they show like the water saved and all that stuff. But it's really good to know that like you can save a little bit of water here and there. That doesn't mean it's the most sustainable option. The responsible fabrics use less water, less energy, and less chemicals to be produced, or it's like a recycled fiber or material. So examples, like in Reformation's part, instead of using viscose, they could have used tensile lyocell, which is similar to viscose. And then there's things like recycled and organic cotton versus normal cotton. That's the most thirsty fiber out there. It takes like 3 years of drinking water to make one t-shirt. based on like the water itself. You can also look for natural fibers versus synthetic fibers, so things like alpaca, hemp, linen. These things usually are less like intrusive on the planet in terms of how they do not damage like the land that they're farmed on. Fabrics is a huge rabbit hole, and I've already said I'm going to do like a specific video on that, but I just wanted to mention some examples. Then you can also check to make sure that their dyeing and their fabrics are held to actual standards with certain certifications. So one of them is Standard 100 by Ecotex, basically measures to make sure that fabrics are safe from like hazardous substances from chemicals and dyes. There's also Blue Sign certified, which is very similar, and then there's also GOTS certified, which is more about organic materials to make sure that they're truly organic and that they've been sourced the most ethically and sustainably. So it's a lot to unpack. I'm going to have links to all of those for more reading, but those are just things to look out for to actually make sure that your fabrics are dyed safely and sourced ethically and sustainably. Next one is, do they use sustainable production methods? Really, you're just looking for examples to show that they actually care about sustainable production. Whether that's like offsetting their carbon emissions to make them carbon neutral, or another example I used in my previous video is whether a brand looks at like their wastewater. Do they extract the toxic sludge before they release the water back into the environment? That toxic sludge, some companies also send off to factories that mix it into concrete, and then that concrete's used for bricks to build homes or like to pave sidewalks and stuff, because you can't really do anything with the toxic sludge. It's like toxic for a reason, which is another thing that like we don't usually think about as consumers. It's like there's so much water that goes into producing clothing, and that water after it's used probably isn't clean. So are they dumping it as dirty water like they probably do in a lot of countries, or are they treating it properly? It's definitely something to look out for. It's like a good example. Other examples are using biodegradable or recyclable materials, because that shows that they're thinking about, okay, after the life of this garment, let's say that the consumer doesn't want to wear it anymore, can it be broken down? Can it be compostable? Can it be shredded and reused into recycled clothing? So that's a really good sign. Another one is their packaging. Do they have a lot of plastics? Do they use compostable packaging? Is it recycled packaging? That's also one of like the easiest things that a brand should do. One of the other things that I've learned from experience of looking into brands is if they don't have sustainability and or transparency and traceability like somewhere apparent on their homepage, whether it's like right in their footer or on their landing page or in their like nav bar, chances are it's not one of their biggest priorities. So if it's hard to find or if it's buried, that's probably a telltale sign that they have something to hide, or they don't value it as a priority for them, or they're greenwashing. So I just wanted to point that out. The camera overheated, so I'm not sure where this stopped. So just like everything else, there are voluntary certifications that you can look out for that do signal that a brand is more like sustainable in their production. One of the more well-known ones is Certified B Corp. So you'll see like the big B, and a lot of brands like Patagonia and Organic Basics has the certification, and certifications are by no means like the be-all end-all of whether a brand is like black and white sustainable or not. I'd still highly recommend reading into their practices and like their sustainability as a whole, because I think that's the biggest thing with sustainability. It's like there's no real definition, there's no legal definition, especially in the fashion industry, so people can get away with saying a lot that doesn't have stuff backing it up. And that's why like this is a full checklist of like all these areas and questions that I look out for, and like the more that you can check off and answer confidently, the more that the brand probably is sustainable and ethical. B Corp is one of the ones that I look out for. It basically signifies that their business practices and their models and everything are held to the highest standards to benefit the people, the planet, and profit. It kind of like encompasses all of those, versus a lot of businesses only care about profit. Highly recommend looking into that more. It's definitely something where when I see a brand is B Corp certified, I'm like, all right, cool, like I want to read more into it, but it is something that I think is a good sign. And the other one that is a bit more rare, I don't see as often, is Cradle to Cradle certification. It means that they produce and make products that are made for a circular economy, meaning that things can be reused or things are in closed loop processes and systems. So highly recommend reading more into that. this is part of a larger conversation, I think, around how we need to shift a lot of the things that we produce, not just in fashion, but in the world, towards a circular economy. So many good videos on that. I'll try to link some below too, but you can literally search circular economy, fashion, and there's so much reading there. And it's really cool. It like goes into like bio-based materials that you can shred down and reuse, or are biodegradable, that go back into the earth, which then provides us with more stuff. Or it's like 3D printing with like certain fibers that you can just keep breaking down and printing stuff with. It's like there's so much there to read about, and it's so cool. So those are the few things to look for when I want to see like sustainable production methods. In terms of just like how things are made, how their stores are operated, like energy efficiency and emissions and all of that stuff. And then the last question, I've talked about on my channel before, talked about in my past like how to shop sustainably and consciously videos, is do they produce at a sustainable scale? And this is one that I don't think a lot of consumers think about, but when we're looking at a like fashion brand or company, it's really important to look at how big they are and how much they produce and how often they produce, because fast fashion just doesn't mean cheap fashion anymore. Fast fashion means that you're promoting a cycle of overconsumption and overproduction. So when people ask me, is Aritzia sustainable? I'm like, well, they always come out with these emails that are like 150 new arrivals this week, and I'm just like, who needs to buy that much clothing? And some good signs to look out for are producing based on demand and on pre-orders to like limit waste, or releasing only a few styles every season, or like not even following seasons and timelines. I want to more so highlight things to look out for that are like signs that they're not producing at a sustainable scale. And one of the easiest ways to spot that is that example of like 150 new arrivals every week. When a brand is coming out with that many new styles, or even when this is one of the things I love doing when I first look at a page, is I'll go click all products, and then I'll see like how many products they list, because usually they're like 2,500 styles or something. Yeah, I like to see like how many styles they have, or like how many pages of product you can flip through on their page, because usually that means like they're coming out with so many designs and styles at a time, and I think that's a sign that they're not sustainable, or that they don't care about it. I also kind of mentioned this one, but having frequent markdowns and sales, when you're producing something that you care about, that's of high quality, and that you like pay fair wages and like labor for, you don't have that much room in your margin unless you're marking it up like so intensely to mark it down severely. It's in fast fashion and cheap fashion where they can produce at such high volumes and so cheaply, because one, they're not paying people fairly, and two, they're using cheap fabrics, and three, they're producing so much that you get economies of scale. You guys, I've talked about that term so much, so I hope you guys know what it means by now. That's when you have like, what's a good example? Let's say like a t-shirt that costs 50 cents to make and they sell it for $10. So of course they'll have 10%, 30%, 50%, 70% clearance sales, because there's nothing to lose there, you know what I mean? So that's also something to look out for. And then the last telltale sign is to look at how many stores they have worldwide. I feel like once a brand hits a certain scale, like let's say Zara, like how many stores do they have around the world? How big of a global network is that? And then imagine the stores have to take energy to run. The product has to continuously get shipped to all of these stores, and how much are they selling out of these stores around the world? Like once you start thinking about it that way, and once you start backtracking to like how many products that's actually like that are actually being made to support that model, it's really clear that it's very fast, very global, very unsustainable. And yeah, I think this is just like really interesting to flip it to think that way, because we as consumers shop a lot. Like it's not new news that we overconsume, not just in fashion but in everything. And there's all of these systems in place and all of these brands that'll say more sustainable lines, or like conscious lines from H&M, or like whatever Zara's is calling theirs. But it's like, hey, it doesn't matter if you have this line when you're also producing mostly like 98% fast, cheap, unethical fashion. So I think one of the tricky things there, and I've talked about this briefly in Everlene's video, for example, is Everlane is a company that has become really popular because of their radical transparency, which, hot take, I don't think transparency is radical anymore, but they're one of the ones that have popularized more conscious fashion, and I think that has done some good. But when you're looking at the scale that they produce at and how many styles they have, I feel like that's where it gets tricky. But that's a whole other conversation. I'm still doing research on that. I plan to do a video on Everlane soon because I think it's so interesting and I want to open up the conversation there. One of the priorities for me right now is to raise awareness and as consumers to like continue to inspire people to not shop fast fashion and to slow down. And as we continue to pull dollars away from fast fashion companies and investing them into smaller BIPOC owned or sustainable brands, we'll see the shift. And I think the shift will also bring changes from the company brand production side of things. And then of course there's also the government, which is like so much there. Everything is interconnected. I have an Everlane video coming soon. If you have other like thoughts or ideas, please drop them in the comments. I spoke about them briefly in my last video about their union busting and everything too. There's so much to unpack everywhere, but I just wanted to mention that as related to this because I still think that gray areas definitely exist in sustainability, and I definitely think that price continues to be the biggest obstacle, where like if we can get more people to thrift and if we can get more people to make more conscious choices compared to like fast fashion at least, like I think that'll be already such a big important change. And I'm always going to stand by that baby steps matter because I know this is overwhelming and I know that there are so many variables, and I don't expect everyone to just drop and be perfectly sustainable because I don't think that's sustainable. I also don't think that it's possible, but the more that more consumers can make changes, the more we can have such a collective impact. So that's always going to be my stance. I never judge or like hate on or like, you know what I mean? Like I never judge people for not being perfect. I'm just here to help inspire, help educate, help raise awareness because I'm also not perfect, and I don't think that's a standard we should hold people accountable for. It's like in those Jubilee videos where the one vegan is like, oh my god, those gummy bears aren't vegan or whatever, you know the video I'm talking about? Like we shouldn't be like that. It basically touches on all of the areas and the questions that I like to ask to spot greenwashing and to spot racism in like fashion brands. I hope this helps. I hope this provides a good baseline like and guidelines for people who are looking to support better brands. I definitely believe that there are brands that are doing good out there that deserve the support, and I think it's just important to remember that like the more informed we can be as consumers, the better choices and buying decisions we can make. Please share the resource on Instagram if you love it. I'm just trying to get it exposed to more people. I tried really hard to make it extensive but also approachable and not too overwhelming. Anyway, those are my thoughts so far. I haven't really been in the mood to like really buy anything, also just because we're also in an economic crisis with the pandemic, but I've just been styling like a lot of my thrifted pieces, and I don't really leave the house anyway, so when do I need to put clothes on? Or like, again, just like styling like shirts, let's say, like in different ways. Check out my how to wear a shirt 5 ways video. There's so many ways to be creative. But I wanted to get this up. A lot of you asked for it in my previous video, and also I know a lot of retail stores are opening up again soon too, and in some cities. I know that there was this whole Twitter thing about the UK and Primark and how the government was like, go out and shop to stimulate the local economy. And I know that activists like Aja Barber, who I love, which you should all follow, have talked about like, no, we can't go back into our normal shopping habits, and I completely agree. So hopefully this video and this checklist and these resources can help us all be more informed and make better choices, because I think we have to vote with our dollars. We are so powerful as consumers collectively, and a revolution is happening. I'm gonna keep saying it. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like if you enjoyed. All of the links to stuff I mentioned is in the description box. Check out the brands I no longer support or follow video. I continue to update regarding those brands in my Instagram stories, so please follow me on Instagram if you haven't yet. It's at inspiroue. If there are other things that you look for to spot greenwashing or when you're deciding to support from a brand, I'd love to hear them, so please comment them down below. I respond to all of my comments. Love just having conversations with you guys down there, so I'll see you in the comments, I guess. All right, love you guys. Bye everyone.